One of the clearest consistencies in any Robert Kirkman comic book series is the abundance of moments that leave you clenching your chest and teetering on the edge of your seat. Over its 13-year run, Invincible has had an abundance of those very same instances. I mean, sure, there is no dearth of comedic elements in the series, but both the comics and the Prime Video series have seen its fair share of dark moments. We have seen more than enough people being punched through the torso. We have seen bodies torn off, entire cities getting leveled, and somehow, in almost every other episode or comic page, you will see someone or the other lose a limb or two. While Invincible, aka Mark Grayson, is the titular protagonist of the series, that certainly does not mean he did not have his fair share of gray moments. Given that he is a Viltrumite, Invincible has barely been seen cutting loose, but there are a few rare moments when Mark lost control and rained hell down on his opponents. So, without wasting another moment, let's take a gander at our top 8 Dark Berserker Invincible moments in the entire series. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Mark vs. Conquest. Be it in the Invincible comics or the Prime Video show, this has to be one of the most brutal fights Mark has ever fought in his early days as Invincible. So, issues 62 through 64 of Invincible had Mark fighting Conquest, a Viltrumite who came to ensure Mark was doing the job that Nolan was supposed to do. Given Mark had just been through the Invincible War and was worrying about a dying Eve, this fight was really a lot on his plate. After seeing that Mark did not do his assigned duty, Conquest makes it clear that he has never failed to conquer a planet, and that Mark will die if he continues to oppose the plan. This is when Mark admits that he has been waiting for someone to fight him, just so he can release his anger and, finally get to cut loose. Moreover, Conquest had clearly earned his name. He is the only Viltrumite you'll see with permanent war scars. Naturally, the fight that ensued between them was bloody, incredible, and heartbreaking, as it took place all over the globe, and even in space at one point. As the two charged at each other, their collision created a massive shockwave, sending debris flying and knocking workers off balance. Conquest easily overpowered Mark, smashing him through a building. Meanwhile, seeing Mark take a hit for the worse, a worried Oliver rushed to help and tried to catch up to Mark and Conquest, but the two were moving so fast that he simply couldn't keep up. During this moment, Mark tried to talk to Conquest, but the Viltrumite refused to stop as he was very clearly enjoying the fight. In an attempt to help, Oliver ambushed Conquest, but Mark quickly rushed to save Oliver, throwing him aside to get him out of danger. Conquest then slammed Mark down, pressing his elbow against his neck, but an undeterred Mark goes on to headbutt Conquest, which only seemed to amuse him. The brute then caught Mark's next punch and warned him that if this was all the strength he had, he would definitely die. On the other hand, Eve finally regained consciousness and spotted Mark fighting on TV. She then urgently asked a doctor to contact Cecil and have him transport her to the battle. Meanwhile, Conquest was tossing Mark around with ease, and when Oliver jumped in and caught Conquest off guard, the Viltrumite proceeded to swat Mark away to focus on Oliver, landing a brutal punch that knocked out Oliver's teeth and broke his arm. Just when Conquest attempted to tear the child in half, Mark intervened, stopping him. Following this, Conquest hurls Mark into a destroyer ship hovering over an island, but he fights back by landing a punch, and before he can react, Eve arrives to help. Meanwhile, Conquest grabs him and snaps his leg, sending pain ripping through Mark as he screams. As a result, Eve tries to contain Conquest in an energy bubble, but he shatters it with one punch. Before she can even react, he brutally beats her, and then, in one swift, merciless move, impales his fist through her body. Mark barely catches Eve as she collapses, and his hands begin to shake as he holds her close. An amused Conquest licks the blood from his finger and thanks Mark for the legendary fight. But after having lost the love of his life, Mark's eyes were burning with fury, and he did not care how strong or fast Conquest was. He grits his teeth and vows as he challenges to kill the Viltrumite, but an unfazed Conquest throws his head back and laughs in Mark's face. At this point, Mark is already heavily injured and in a rather awful state, but seeing Eve dead, his relentless rage somehow boosts his powers to some god-level force. The two then charge at each other with their fists, colliding with a devastating impact that shatters Mark's forearm and destroys Conquest's cybernetic arm. The older Viltrumite barely flinches, simply grinning at the thrill of battle. As the brutal fight rages on, Eve, who had been on the brink of death, suddenly wakes up, and her body begins to rebuild itself, fully regenerating before Mark's eyes. He continues to pound Conquest into the ground, but when he glances toward Eve, a sense of relief washes over him. Sadly, that split-second distraction costs him as Conquest lands a vicious punch, sending Mark reeling. But before Conquest can press at the advantage, Eve fires a powerful energy blast, scorching his skin and leaving him charred and burned. Unfortunately, this effort drains her completely, and she collapses. Somehow, Conquest was still barely affected by the blast, and so he turned his attention to her, ready to finish the job. But before the brute can even touch Eve, Mark goes blind with pure rage as he launches himself at Conquest, with fists hammering down in a frenzy. Now, the shocker comes as Conquest catches Mark's punch mid-swing and, with a sickening crunch, crushes his hand. As Mark lets out a scream of agony, a sadistic Conquest simply chuckles after being visibly entertained by his suffering. Still, Invincible refuses to back down, and with every ounce of strength he has left, Mark slams his forehead into Conquest's face, again and again, until the older Viltrumite's features are barely recognizable and he seemingly dies. This fight was the first time we got to see just how powerful Mark could be if he decides to let loose. And let's just say, the whole incident was nothing short of being bloody iconic. Mark finally killing Conquest in the Viltrumite War. So, after the mega fight between Invincible and Conquest, Mark was in a coma for a good few days. But after he woke up, he demanded to see Conquest's dead body and asked to burn it, in order to ensure that Cecil could not use the old Viltrumite to the government's benefit. But as it turns out, Cecil faked Conquest's death in front of Mark, and instead, he stored the Viltrumite's smashed body in a 400-ton block of steel alloy, 600 miles underground in the desert. Now, Cecil was waiting for the Viltrumite to heal and regain consciousness so he could find out everything he could about the Viltrumite Empire and figure out how to stop them. But this horrible decision that came to bite his back in the ass during the Viltrumite War, as Conquest simply broke out of the prison and went straight to Thrag after he was all healed up. Now, after Mark left Earth with his father, Tech Jacket, and Alan in order to meet the coalition of planets, on their way to space, they were attacked by a fully recovered and still alive Conquest, along with Lucan and an unnamed Viltrumite from before. Naturally, they all begin to fight, and in the middle of the fight, Oliver loses his breath and is forced to find the nearest planet to catch some air. Conquest also follows him, and just as he was about to attack Oliver, Mark cuts him off, and the two of them continue their fight. Honestly, this rematch was batshit crazy, as right from the beginning, we get the sense that it is going to be bloody, unhinged, and only one of them is going to make it out alive. When Mark demands to know how Conquest was still alive, the Viltrumite revealed how he was kept encased in a prison by Cecil. Conquest then cracked Nolan and Oliver around before he and Mark fell to a mysterious planet, and there, they created shockwaves once again with their fists. Eventually, Conquest would punch through Mark's stomach and rip his innards out. But the scrap was all about Mark's resolve, as he never let go of his choke. Invincible proved his mettle as he strangled Conquest and suffocated the brute to death, although Conquest also paid back dearly, as Mark needed over a month to recover from this one. This battle also marked the concession of how the Viltrumite War had finally started. Invincible killing Onan. So, after his defeat in the Viltrumite War, Thrag was dethroned by Omni-Man and sentenced to exile. Consumed with revenge, Thrag then went to Thraxa to gather his strength and plan his attack. Due to Thraxan and Viltrumites being able to produce powerful Viltrumite offspring, Thrag began to mate with all the women of the planet in order to create a child army and reclaim his title as ruler of this new generation of Viltrumites. If Thraxan birthing camps aren't bad enough, Thrag raised the children with violence and torture, sacrificing them without hesitation by the hundreds. When the disgraced Viltrumite finally comes for the Graysons, he uses the children as literal human shields in order to weaken Invincible and ensure his victory. Sure, Thrag does many terrible things throughout the Invincible saga, but this is by far the worst, and may even cross the line as the most horrifying crap he has ever pulled. I mean, he did not even know the names of all his children, and always justified their existence to be disposable, as they were all solely created to cater to his personal agenda. Out of all of Thrag's hybrid Viltrumite children, the most prominent characters were Onan and Ursal. Now, Onan was the most vicious of Thrag's children, who had a taste for mindless violence. He was sent along with his twin sister Ursal, the first pair of Viltrumite twins in generations, to kill Mark Grayson's family. But when Mark grabbed Tara and fled, he pursued the duo closely. Later, when Thrag came for the Graysons, Oliver tried to save Tara from his clutches. That is when Mark arrived at the scene holding Onan's head ransom in exchange for Tara's life. But unfortunately, nothing mattered for Thrag, as he impaled Oliver and brutally killed him right in front of Tara. Devastated by his brother's death, Mark then completely lost his shit. That is when his rage completely narrows down on Onan, as Mark blurts how being a hero is bullshit before crushing Onan's neck with one hand and killing him. With that one line, I think it was Mark finally admitting he wasn't doing it for others, and he wasn't gonna get dragged down by morals and risk his daughter's life. Pulverizing Onan's neck like that definitely came as a shock to me, as until then, Mark was really careful about who he killed, but seeing his brother dead and his daughter's life in danger, dude really just embraced unhinged violence. Everything else Mark did could be chalked up to a morally gray area of being a superhero, but this one? Even if Onan was an indoctrinated murder machine hell-bent on killing his family, Mark still killed a kid, intentionally. Mark's final battle with Thrag. As one of the biggest bads of the series, and the murderer of Mark's brother and father, Grand Regent Thrag irrevocably shaped Mark's life more directly than many of his other enemies. Towards the very end of the Invincible's 144-issue run, Thrag and Invincible face off in an ultimate showdown that takes place on the Sun. With every consequent panel and page, the fight gets more and more unsettling in visual terms. With all this emotional baggage, it was the brutal death of Nolan that pushed Mark to his physical limits as he tore out Thrag's throat in one of the series' most epic moments. Battling it out on the surface of the Sun, Invincible and Thrag's final battle was a culmination of the series' long struggle between Mark's Viltrumite and human heritages against a jaw-dropping backdrop of stellar proportions, as Invincible went to bath-sit crazy levels to avenge the family he had lost to Thrag. The scene is obviously iconic, because both characters' skin begins to melt in the face of the burning heat. In fact, there comes a point where the reader can just see the two Viltrumites as burning masses of muscle and blood. Now, for Thrag, it was all about revenge for what Invincible's bloodline did to stop him from claiming the empire he deserved to rule. Eventually, when Thrag tried to make an escape, Mark pulled them both into the core of the Sun by burning all of their flesh off. After that, Mark, despite knowing that he could not hear his thoughts anymore, started to describe in perfect detail at how much Thrag sucked as a leader and a Viltrumite for clinging to the old practices that brought their race to the brink of extinction by fighting for selfish and empty causes. Ultimately, Mark gained the upper hand when one of Robot's armors arrived and attached itself to him, in order to grant him a few extra moments of protection from the searing heat while Thrag continued to burn. With their fight getting more intense with more and more explosions from the Sun, the lava ended up even melting the robot armor Invincible was wearing. They ended up fighting inches away from the Sun as their bodies became even more unrecognizable. In the final moments of the fight, Thrag, having sustained far more damage than his opponent, broke both of Mark's arms in a fit of rage and desperation, but Mark refused to back down, and finally killed Thrag by brutally ripping his throat out with his teeth. After this, Mark was ready to face his own death, but Alan arrived just in time to carry him to safety, leaving Thrag's corpse behind to be consumed by the Sun. This finally marked the end of Thrag's reign of terror once and for all. With Thrag now dead, the Viltrumites, including his children, could finally move forward and become a force for good in the universe, with Mark Grayson as their new emperor.
Wait! Please! Enough!
Future King. Immortal pushes Invincible over to the edge. There are tons of superheroes in the Invincible universe, but one of the most tragic ones is the Immortal, who, as his name implies, cannot die. So, many years in the future, after Mark Grayson decides to leave Earth, he leaves it in charge of the Immortal, who eventually goes insane and becomes a brutal dictator. This version of Immortal is intentionally tyrannical, as he tries to force an uprising that would end in his death. But when every uprising fails to tackle his might, Fightmaster and Dropkick travel back in time to search for the current timeline's Invincible, right after he had his huge fallout Cecil and the GDA. One day, when Mark and Eve were in the middle of having a dinner date in Paris, they were interrupted by Fightmaster and Dropkick, who asked Mark to go to the future with them. When Mark refused to tag along, they pretty much pulled him inside the portal to travel to their timeline, where the world was on the brink of extinction under a tyrant's rule. In order to get closer to the said tyrant, Mark and the duo allow themselves to be captured and are taken to a prison. But while Fightmaster and Dropkick are taken to be executed, Mark instead is taken to the king. It is then revealed that the tyrant who rules this world was none other than Immortal. King Immortal stated how he wanted to die and asked Mark to do it. Initially, Mark refuses to do it and tries to calm this insane guy down, but when the Immortal starts telling Mark about his future, which he very much does not want to hear, Immortal then lunges himself at Mark and keeps going at it until Mark loses his temper and decapitates the Immortal by simply pulling his head out of his body. This was easily one of the most bizarre, weird, and shocking sidelines in the comic, which, in no way, is easy to overlook, as ripping off the head of someone as powerful as Immortal in such a grotesque manner was not something any of us expected Mark to do. The death of Angstrom Levy. During the early days of Mark's superhero career, one of the most iconic and shocking moments in the entire Invincible series was Angstrom Levy's death at his bare hands that changed the hero's psyche for the rest of his life. This was actually the first real instance of Invincible losing control and giving in to his darker and more violent Viltrumite urges, as Mark savagely pummeled Angstrom to a pulp, blinded by rage at the thought of Levy's harming his family any more than he already had. I mean, in his defense, Levy tore off his mom's arm and almost killed his baby brother, but still, Mark did not want to kill him. After seeing his brutalized mother, Invincible simply lost all feelings of remorse and slammed Angstrom into the asphalt outside his home. Angstrom then revealed that his plan was to weaken Mark by sending him through countless alternate dimensions, each designed to wear him down, making it easier to kill him. Though his enhancements initially made him a match for Mark throughout many of the universes they traveled to, his constant threats of violence against Mark's family finally pushed Invincible over the edge. Once Levy transported them to a desolate place, Mark could not hold back anymore. He physically and mentally unloaded all of his pent-up stress onto Angstrom Levy, punching him through the air, slamming him to the ground, and beating him down until he finally made a fist with both his hands interlocked and brutally pulverized the villain's head into red mush in one fatal blow, thus finally ending Angstrom's threats. After standing in a pool of Levy's blood, when Mark realized what he had done, he stared down in disbelief as he really thought Levy would be strong enough to survive Mark unleashing his full Viltrumite strength on him. While Angstrom Levy technically survived to menace Invincible another day, Mark's belief that he killed Levy scarred him for quite some time, and it was arguably the first time he at least attempted to take a life, with the ramifications of this brutal and bloody battle leading to the earth-shattering Invincible War years later, and cementing Angstrom Levy as one of Mark Grayson's ultimate opponents in any universe. Mark killing an innocent man. True enthusiasts of the Invincible comic series will remember the Sequids, a parasitic alien race freed from their captivity by Invincible and the Guardians while being on a mission to Mars. Using the astronaut Roose Livingston as their host, the Sequids have been a recurring nuisance to Invincible in their attempt to leave Mars and take over Earth as these small squid-like beings that exist in a hive mind and can possess people's bodies. Their primary host was Russ Livingston, and through him, the Sequids began their invasion on Earth. In Invincible issue 70, the Sequids successfully make it to the planet in the body of Livingston and take over nearly the entire city. Unable to hold them off, Mark was simply overwhelmed by one tragic event after another, and so he just let loose and killed Livingston by punching his head clean off in order to neutralize the Sequid hive mind. While this definitely ended the threat of the Sequids, Roose Livingston was an innocent man who was taken over by the Sequids and had no control over his body. So, Mark's willingness to kill him with nearly zero hesitation was a move that left even Robot questioning his reasoning. This was right after the whole battle with Conquest, when Mark swore to Oliver that he would not hesitate to kill anyone harming his loved ones. While we do see him leaning over to the dark side, it was simply awful to see Mark murdering an innocent man who could be saved. This inarguable murder went to show just how much Mark had hardened as the years went on, pushing him deeper and deeper into a more pragmatic, cold-blooded, Viltrumite mindset, mirroring that of his father and younger brother, risking to pull him away from his more heroic nature. Up until this point, Invincible had always seen human life as precious, and while he ultimately regretted having killed an innocent man, it was only the first life he had purposely taken by justifying it to be the only means to save Earth. Invincible kills Dinosaurus. Invincible and Dinosaurus first came together under a common understanding that, in order to protect humanity and create a better world, the underlying problems of society have to be dealt with first. War, poverty, and environmental destruction could all be stopped with a decent plan and a few tough calls. But after devastating his reputation, while assuming himself to be a moral authority for the world, Invincible came to realize how far Dinosaurus was willing to go in order to achieve their mutual dream. In an attempt to show Dinosaurus the dangerous path that his equation for long-term peace created, the reptilian anti-hero conceded, still believing that his atrocities would bring something good, but fearing that he may tread too close to villainy. Dinosaurus seemingly gave up everything he had worked for, asking Mark to kill him then and there. While the bloody ending between the two unlikely teammates occurred off-panel, Mark is next seen solemnly walking outside while tracking a long trail of bloody footprints. Moreover, Dinosaurus had one of the highest body counts throughout all Invincible lore, but it was his own death that had a truly profound impact on Mark Grayson. Having already devastated the Earth and killed nearly 800,000 people during the death of everyone after he was freed by Invincible to help save the world, the alter ego of David Anders ultimately realized the flaws in his Thanos-like logic. Once he makes it on the Amazon Prime show, I think Dinosaurus may become one of the best fictional dinosaurs in pop culture. Half the time, he was a normal human, but when he got bored, he transformed into an incredibly strong humanoid dinosaur. He was also an evil genius that performed acts of mass murder for what he believed to be the sake of good, such as destroying large cities to stop overpopulation. To help the planet go green, he thought it would be a great idea to make Las Vegas the answer to the world's eco-problems. Based on his own calculations, Sin City had wasted far too many resources and was on the verge of going belly up soon anyway, so he planted more than 50 atomic bombs up and down the strip to level the entire city. While it wasn't a major plot point of the series given that a major war had just wrapped up, a lot of people still died. Sure, the city was turned into glass and eventually transformed into a giant solar panel, which is extremely helpful for the environment, but, again, a ton of people died for that to happen. At the end, Mark's execution of Dinosaurus served as a symbolic acknowledgement of his own undeniable mistakes, as well as his part in Dinosaurus's genocidal actions to reshape the Earth, eventually leading to him to patch things up with Cecil Stedman and resume his place in the fold as a more traditional hero, as opposed to spending the rest of his incredibly long life in prison. So, that was it for our top picks of moments that Mark Grayson cut loose and unleashed hell down on the world. While no superhero gets to be a real hero without making a few mistakes, I think nobody has piled up the amount of body counts like Mark. Be it during his alliance with Dinosaurus, his duel with his father, his battle with Conquest, or other smaller fights, the losses the commoners suffered were somehow always ignored as collateral damage. It was not until Mark assumed the role of the new Emperor of Viltrum that we see a change in his leadership. I think the biggest example of that would be his final battle with Robot. While Robot may have started out as Invincible's friend, he ended up being one of Mark's greatest foes, and it was his death that ultimately declared just how much the young Grayson had changed by the end of the series. When he could not trust Robot after his attempts at world domination and the extermination of Mark's family, Invincible physically kills Robot's body, only to have his brain preserved beneath the Pentagon for the betterment of the world. Considering everything that Robot had done by the end of the series, his death was far from surprising, but it was Mark's murder of Robot and Rudy's brain's subsequent revival that demonstrated the line between pragmatism and heroism that Invincible was ultimately willing to walk, which was a fair change from his staunch anti-killing policy at the start of his journey. Anyways, you get the point. Now, What do you guys think about Mark's character development at the end of the comic series? Let us know about your thoughts in the comment box below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Invincible content. Stay safe, and we will see you guys